Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. I want to do another episode in the series on the King James Bible, King James Version. And we're talking today about the Bible as the shaping of modern English. No other book has so penetrated and permeated the heart and speech of the English race as has the Bible. What Homer was to the Greeks and the Quran was to the Arabs, that is, or something not unlike it, the Bible has become to the English, said Albert Stanborough Cook, Professor of English Language and Literature at Yale University in the 1920s. The Bible has achieved a literary excellence precisely by choosing to avoid it. Literary excellence was not even mentioned by the translators as a criteria before the 17th century team of translators. The King James Bible, along with the works of William Shakespeare, are regularly singled out as the most foundational influences on the development of the modern English language. Now, eloquence came to the King James Version by accident. They never planned to be eloquent. It's just something that happened to occur. Their concern was primarily to provide an accurate translation of the Bible on the assumption that accuracy was itself the most aesthetic of qualities to be desired. Paradoxically, the King's translators achieved literary distinction precisely because they weren't deliberately pursuing it. Aiming at truth, they achieved what later generations recognized as beauty and elegance. It was achieved by accident. They said, we have not tied ourselves to a uniformity of phrasing or an identity of words, as some peradventure would wish that we have done, but we should express the same notion in the same particular word, as for example, as we translate the Hebrew or the Greek word for purpose, never to call it intent. We thought a savor more of curiosity than wisdom. So they didn't plan for the scripture to be eloquent. It just happened to become eloquent as a result of the translation. The movement toward the standardization of vernacular language proceeded apace throughout Western Europe in the late 16th century. The abandoning of Latin as the language of government and diplomacy led to an increased interest in the standardization, refinement, and the fixing of national languages. Now, even in the time of William Caxton, the potential of the printing press for shaping language had been recognized. The English Caxton translators was largely based on London English. Got that? As used by civil servants and lawyers. Yet the Bible used in the King James Version was not a universal English accepted by all throughout King James's realm. Northern forms of English made little, if any, impact on the translation, and the King James Bible was written in a standard literary language, free from the confusing variations of dialect. So if you were in the north of England and you read the King James Bible, it would sound like a toff from London speaking. Got that now? Initially, the language of the King James Bible might seem unnatural, artificial, and stilted to some. The King James Bible was published within a window of opportunity which allowed it to exercise a substantial, decisive influence over the shaping of the English language. The King James Bible and the works of William Shakespeare both date from the same critical period. Now, we've talked about translation a lot. Sometimes when the translators are translating a foreign word, they will find no word in the English language that corresponds to it. For example, if you want to translate the word baptism, you would find that there would be no English equivalent for that word in English. And so instead of translating it into an English word, what they would do is they would transliterate. Now, transliteration means that they take the Greek word baptizo and they just turn it into an English word, but they anglicize it. They call it baptism. Okay, so we're not translating here. What we're doing is we're transliterating. And one of the interesting features of the English language is its willingness to absorb words and phrases that have their origins in other languages. We borrow classical terms. I mean, in the table alphabetical of hard words in 1604, there were 2,500 unusual or borrowed words, assume that the readers had assimilated. For example, most of the words that were assimilated were of a feminine gender. Very interesting. So England's rise to global status as a trading nation meant that a tremendous amount of words were incorporated into the English language. For example, during England's complex and checkered history as a colonial power, the large number of Hindi words and phrases can be identified in late Victorian English. And they reflect the intimate British involvement with the Indian subcontract over many generations. One of the most fundamental contributing factors to this willingness to accept and use verbal immigrants in this formal period was the influence of the King James Bible. Many phrases had their origin in Hebrew, Greek, or Latin context. The failure of many users of the King James Bible to realize that the Bible was originally written in any other language than English. You know, this is a great point for today. We have to constantly keep reminding people the Bible wasn't written in English, and it wasn't written in 1611 English, nor was it written in 2000 English. It was written in Hebrew. Written in Hebrew and Greek of the first century. The Greek style was that of the ordinary people. It wasn't of the classical Greek, and it also wasn't Latin. The influence was Greek. As a result of centuries of use, many Hebraic phrases and idioms have become so common in normal English use that our most modern English speakers are unaware of the biblical origins. Now, I can go into some examples of this, but the King James Bible is estimated to have 93% of the words used in the King James Bible are actually native English words, 93%. That's quite astounding. The King James Bible is an almost literal translation of the Masoretic text and is thus on every page full of Hebrew idioms. It can be said without any fear being charged with exaggeration, it was the most powerful factor in the history of English literature. And now let's give you a list of some of these phrases, these idioms. For example, we have an idiom which is to lick the dust. Okay, to lick the dust. To fall flat on the face. Now that's a Hebrew idiom, as is a man after his own heart. To pour out one's heart. The land of the living. Under the sun. Sour grapes. From time to time. Pride goes before a fall. The skin of my teeth. To stand in awe. To put words in his mouth. To go from strength to strength, to go like a lamb to the slaughter. Now, these are all Hebrew idioms. They're not English idioms, they're Hebrew idioms. Our standard English phrases present minor modifications of development of Hebraic originals in the King James Version. So, for example, rise and shine, to see the writing on the wall, a fly in the ointment, a drop of a bucket. In the New Testament, we have the salt of the earth, a thorn in the flesh, to give up the ghost, the powers that be, and it came to pass, is over in 400 passages in the Bible. The scales fell from the eyes. Now, the comparison of the King James Bible with the Geneva Bible suggests that the King's translators were more likely to maintain the Hebrew word order or structure, even when this resulted in a reading that did not sound quite right to English ears. William Tyndale had argued that there was a natural affinity between English and Hebrew, so that the ploughboy would not have any difficulty with Semitic turns of phrase. Now that's a little bit optimistic for a ploughboy to be able to understand Hebrew idioms, but never mind. Also, we need to bear in mind the archaic English forms of the King James Bible. In the days in which the King James Bible was being written, the language that was chosen in English was in a form that was already ancient at that time. At that time, it was already ancient. We need to understand that. These were classical Greek scholars, so they were already thinking in terms of the ancient languages. And so we still have the thous and the yous. We still have the these and the thy and the ye. These are expressions in English which reflect something which, even in the day when the King James Version was being translated or revised, they were already ancient in those days. The ordinary Bible read in the church, commonly called the Bishop's Bible, is to be followed and as little altered as the truth of the original will permit. So therefore, the translators were very restricted. They weren't doing a complete translation straight from the Greek. They were doing a revision of the Bishop's Bible. Okay? However, what were the instructions from the Great Bible? Well, the instructions from the Great Bible was that they were to alter as little as possible from the Tyndale. So each of the translators, as they came on, they were only revising what was previously done. All of them were translating in an archaic form, every single one of them. And yet, remarkably, when we come to the King James Version, we find that virtually most passages in the New Testament are very close to William Tyndale's original Greek translation, exceptionally close. This is a tremendous issue, and there are some very technical, I'm going to pass over them, but there are some very technical issues in the text which translators will be interested in, but which we don't necessarily need to burden ourselves in this translation. One of the things is the possession or the possessor. Is it his or is it its? ITS. In one particular verse, the cubit shall be its length, and a cubit its breadth. 7 times is the word its used in that particular translation, the Revised Standard Version. Okay. However, when you look at the same in the King James Version, you'll discover that it's a very cumbersome way of translating. A cubit shall be the length thereof. Okay, that's what we said. A cubit, the breadth thereof, 4 square, and so on. And so the use of the word its was something that was beginning to happen in the English language. However, the general points raised in this section are of considerable interest, in that they suggest that the King James Bible would actually have been perceived to be slightly old-fashioned and dated even on the first day of its publication. So let me say that again. The King James Version was already old-fashioned, and it was already out of date, actually, on the first day in which it was produced. This naturally leads us to the question of how was the King James Bible received? How was it received? And that's going to be the subject of our next chapter, which is chapter 12. And we look forward to catching up with you on that day. So have a wonderful day, and God bless you all. Bye for now.